Welcome to part 3. Today we're going to be going over how to set an NPC, how to create dialogue for said NPC, and also creating a cutscene to have a specific camera angle for this NPC that we're going to make. So let's begin by creating our NPC. So you want to be selected on the lab. You hit add monster. We're going to be adding Natasha. So let's add Natasha. You can just type N and it'll go to her right away. Just note that Natasha is a episode 2 only NPC, so you will not be able to access her in episode 1. You want to have her set to wave 0. Then you click add. And if we zoom in, you can use the mouse wheel to zoom in and the right click to move the map around. Okay. And if I just click up here, she gets placed. Now, if we go into, you can either double click on Natasha up here, or you can hit edit data. Either one is the same. And here, we're going to tie her to a function. Is there any specific function you'd like to tie her with?
Well, let's start with 15.
Okay, go 15 and character ID. I guess we can start with...
Has to be above 100 for NPCs.
Okay, so we will make her character ID 150. Just to make it easy. Movement flag, you leave it 0 if you don't want her to move. Obviously, we don't want her moving because she's standing behind a desk. And the rest you can just leave alone. Now we can go into the script and start writing her dialogue. So I'll let you take over here.
Okay. We'll probably just do some simple dialogue for her that says, hey, you just made an NPC. The first thing that we're going to need here is we're going to set up some functionality for the little cutscene that we're going to eventually make. So even though this is going to be dialogue, we're going to start this off with a call function, and we're going to be calling function 2. 2, if you forget, that's the disable movement function that we wrote from the previous episode. That basically means that once this quest starts and we talk to her, you're not going to be able to have a dialogue box on screen and be able to just walk around with it. So now from this, we can set up message. Message is the most basic NPC dialogue option you have. It's the chat bubble that would appear above your head. The D word in this is the character ID that you want it to talk from, the way that the arrow points. And then the string is just the information that you want to read from. Big mention, make sure that you keep track of whether you're in hex or decimal. I just tried typing 150 with it in hex there, and it came out as that number. And for her dialogue, we'll just say, congratulations, you started the quest. Now, if we wanted to have a second dialogue option in here, we would not use message. We could, but it's unnecessary because message already handles functionality itself. So we'll instead use add message, which continues the string that was provided from the previous. Since she starts with one dialogue box, we can just make her go straight into a second without signifying that another character ID is being spoken. And for this one, we'll just say, do you want to know your difficulty? From here, this is the last thing that she's going to say. So we'll just do mess end for message. That way, when the text boxes are done, it just ends the message. To complete the function itself, we're going to need to enable movement again. So this is when we're going to need to call function 3. And function 3, if you have forgotten, is the enable movement function. So this function 15 is standalone, ready to go, and will return function to the player when you're done. As always, remember to end it with a ret. From here, we're going to include another dialog option in here, which is list. And while I set this up, Kayak will start talking about it.
Okay, so list is basically a list of options that is presented to the player. For this, we're just going to use a simple yes and no choice. And what I think we're going to go with is that we're going to use the difficulty functionality we set up last time. So he's going to go into a yes or no for the difficulty. And the way you do this is once he enters his register of 5 here, there's a couple ways you can do this. You could use a jump by if register equals 5. If you're
And the options are in the order that it's presented in. Yes, in this case, is when R5 is 0.
Yes.
No is when it is equal to 1.
Yep. So since we set this to 0, that would mean they clicked yes, and it would jump right to function 10, which then goes into the switch call that says you are in X difficulty. If you hit no, then it'll just proceed to call 3, which will re-enable the player's movement.
In the future, we can change that jump by equal to R5 to be something if we did want to include a dialog option for no, but for this case we don't, because it's just an option to the player. From here now, we're going to begin setting up the cutscene. This is quite intensive for a first go through. First thing we're going to have to do is we're going to change the floor handler that's on Pioneer 2. This is going to be...
Nope, you want to change function 2 here.
Function 3, yes. We're going to change this to an arbitrary number that we have. It's not going to be 15, because we have to also include the other functions that we're going to use. Just for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to make this 20. Now, as I'm sure you've noticed, back when I made function 5 and 6 to 10 from the last episode, I skipped over those numbers. That was mostly because I'm planning on using functions 7, 8, and 9 for something else later on that may be tied to function 6 itself, so I'm leaving a couple spaces open for it. I skipped to 10 because it's an easy number, and from there we're just able to begin continuing generating some functions. The function that we're going to start with for 20 is going to be a switch jump. This is going to be checking with register 0. And a switch, as if you remember from switch call, the first that you put in is the number of options that you have for it, and the functions that it leads to based on the number. Considering that register 0 is used when a quest is starting, it'll almost always be 0 when the quest starts. So, from function 0, when we appear on Pioneer 2, it'll immediately jump to function 20, and since function 20 checks R0, R0 is 0 in this case because we're starting the quest, so function 21 will contain all of the scripting that occurs when the quest starts. When function 21 ends, it'll end with a set R0 that will say next time you go to Pioneer 2, it instead starts at function 22. And 22 in this case could be a call 1. Call 1, if you remember, is just a simple ret. There's not really going to be anything occurring for that. We could make this 1 instead of 22. It would help reduce sizing. But function 21 is going to contain a lot of information in here. So I'm going to have Kayak discuss things as I create them.
So what he's going to start doing is creating a camera. So when you first would get into the quest, you'll have a set camera that will be specific to Natasha. And
for setting up the camera, we're going to be using one of the tools that Qedit uses, which is a 3D viewer. This 3D viewer allows you to see where things are placed and the coordinates that are associated with them, and have an actual visual representation of it. If we click Natasha, it'll take us to the room, the map section that she is in. And we can use Q to fast forward. We're going to go over towards Natasha.
So the keys to control this are Q goes forward, A goes back, and you can use the mouse to drag which direction you want to go in, left, right, up, down. So let's see. And then your coordinates, you can use D to change them into hex or decimal. We're going to use decimal because that's the easiest. How's this look?
Looks pretty good. And with that information, I'll be able to begin the coordinates for the functions.
So for the quick edit there, we just kind of move things around just to kind of help us out with the 3D viewer and be able to see our coordinates. So what he's doing here is he's going to be entering is it 6 registers required to put a camera? So
6.
Right. So the first 3 are X, Y, and Z. And these numbers need
of
to
the camera itself.
Right. Of the camera positioning itself, of where it's facing. And then the next
Nope. The next 3 are the ones that are the position the camera is pointing at. Now, I'm just keeping the image in the 3D viewer static because I know the information itself. We're just going to have the camera point slightly downward towards Natasha. And from the position it's at, the Z coordinate is about -194. We're going to make the camera specifically look at a coordinate that's behind Natasha so that it looks towards her. When you make cameras, sometimes if you make the coordinates same, you can get a very weird camera shot. So we're just specifically setting 2 points in space where the camera and the point it's looking at are not on any of the same planes.
Right. So just to review, the first 3 registers are X, Y, Z of the location of the camera. The second 3 are the locations of where it's looking at in X, Y, Z in that order. And
the opcode we're using for this is Leti fixed camera. There's a V1 and a V3 version. For our cases, neither of them matters. We're just going to use V3.
And telling it to start at R60, it will read it from R60 top down to look at that, basically to where to start looking at the coordinates for your camera.
Next, we're going to set a spawn point.
Yes, so this will actually overwrite the player set object that we used in the first episode. And we'll eventually delete that when we get to it. We're going to be, this is basically just a simple XYZ, and then I believe it also uses a player slot in the fourth register.
And a rotation.
Oh, so it's five registers, so it uses an XYZ, then a rotation, then player slot, I believe.
If we look on the map itself here, the player set that we had set prior, this is down at a coordinate of about 16 in the z-axis. What we're going to do is we're going to make the script spawn us up by Natasha for the cutscene. So when you hover over the map, you can see the coordinates get updated. So we know this point where the mouse is at right now, it's z negative 184. This is going to be the coordinate that we place the player on for the opcode. Oh, right.
And you can, for stuff like setting a camera and setting a player, you can reuse the registers. It's not a huge deal, as so long as you don't use those registers for anything else. When you use these registers again, you're basically overwriting what you had used previously.
The function that we're using to set the player here with the script is psetpos. This function accepts a dword and a register. Some opcodes allow functionality of registers to contain information as well. So for this dword, it's checking for the first function to set the coordinates and the rotation. Since we're using R60 as the starting coordinate, we can use R60 as the dword and it'll accept those values. It doesn't have to be a dword. If you use the dword, you can just individually set each player's coordinates. Again, for the cleanliness of the script, by using a register, it allows us to save some space. Always end the function with a ret. Now these two functions here set the camera and set the player where it needs to go. So now we'll actually do a cutscene function. So the quest dialog and cutscene is going to occur in function 21. The order that we're going to have this occur in is we're going to set the position of the character first, which is function 23. We will then call function 22, which sets the camera. And then we will do a fade in. This will cause the screen to go from black to visible to show you everything that will occur. And once the screen fades in, we will then call function 15, which is the dialogue. Let me put the ret in. Now to make the quest not run this every time you load onto Pioneer 2, we need to have a set R0. In function 20, if R0 is 1, that'll just make a ret, which means nothing really happens. So at the end of the dialogue in 15, we'll set an R0. This basically says that the opening quest script is complete. Obviously, it will ask the question whether you want to see your difficulty, which doesn't determine whether the register gets set because it goes from top to bottom. As long as the quest completes with R0 being set, it means that function 20 will never have anything function 21 occurs again.
You're also going to want to set the player's camera back to normal, because when you set a fixed camera like this, you have to also tell it to go back to normal as well. So we can place that right after we give the player their movement back in function 3. So default camera position is the one that you want.
And it's important to mention here, because we used a jump eye for if the function is hit yes, if function 10 occurs, that means that the camera would never be set back. So to fix this, we will end function 10 with a default camera pos, as well as a ret. We forgot to write a ret for function 10 before. Again, to reiterate, function 10 is a switch call. Whatever the switch call calls returns back to function 10 when it's done. Function 20 is a switch jump. Whatever it jumps to does not return back to 20. That's why a switch call gets a ret, but the switch jump has nothing. In this case, a ret here doesn't change anything that function 20 does.
Instead of this set R0, you could just do Leti R0 and then the value you want. I mean, it would accomplish the same thing.
Now that we have fleshed out the script for the cutscene, the camera, and the dialogue, we're just going to go test the quest with all of the changes that we've had in the last couple parts.
Okay, so now that we have our quests ready to test, we're just going to load it real quick. Oh, shoot. As you can see, our camera is maybe a bit far zoomed out, but you know, that's something that you have to go through in trial and error to get that to exactly how you want it, but it's good enough for this purpose. Yes, we want to know the difficulty. You are in ultimate difficulty. And I can't move. So call 3 is never happening. So let's see, we're going, so if register,
Right,
this is a jump by. It's a jump by. So we would need to add a call 3 in one of these, or we need to change how this is handled.
At the end of the switch call.
Yep.
We'll do it after the default camera pos.
So yeah, as you can see, we forgot to add a call 3, because if you go to look at function 15 here, we use a jump by. So anything that's after this jump by will not get read. That's why my player cannot move. So we also realized this small error here. In player set pos, you need to put the get slot number register first, and then you put the other register that starts the coordinates to look at. So we just basically got those backwards. Something like that's pretty common. So just to review, R250 is get slot number. You're just basically reusing that.
And remember that the Qedit wiki is your friend for a lot of these opcodes, because not all of these opcodes follow the same formats.
So I'm going to resave this again, and I'll see you in a second to retest this. Okay, so now that we have our quest loaded in again, okay, we've started the quest. Let's know our difficulty. I chose very hard this time just to get a different result. Yep, and our player is in the correct spot now. So now
and we can move.
Yep. So things are moving. Things are moving up. So now we have to check the scripting we did in the last part regarding killing the enemy and getting the special text to pop up. We can move down here. Spawn the enemy. Door's unlocked. So everything we did works. And we can move again.
It's not uncommon to put one or two things up and then retest it, especially on some more intricate scripting sections. So don't be surprised if you have to redo part of a quest up to like 100 times because something doesn't seem to be working right. It takes a lot of trial and error, and just like any programming language, it can take some time to find some very simple mistakes.
Yeah, it's normal to expect to test something over and over if it's not performing the way you anticipated or it's just flat out not working. So, with that being said, this will be the end to part 3. Stay tuned for part 4, where we go into more further scripting advancements and more difficult and challenging opcodes. Take care.